was not planning on filming a video today, but then this showed up at my door. And when a palette like this shows up at your door, you simply must drop everything and film a video. And that's the law. So we are talking about DANESSA MYRICKS Lightwork Volume 4. From the second I saw swatches of this palette, I knew I had to have it. I don't have any of the other DANESSA MYRICKS palettes. I am somewhat familiar with the brand. I've tried a few things, but none of the eyeshadow palettes. But this color story got me so excited. I have swatched the palette, so I'll include swatches here. It just has the most incredible, rich, saturated jewel tones, and I've been hungry for a very saturated, rich jewel toned palette. I don't have anything like this in my collection, and I love, love, love the curation of colors in this palette as well as the textures. So there are 14 shades in this palette, and it is $125. So it's an expensive palette, on par with Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona. There are 8 velvet chrome powders, 2 pressed chrome flake shades, 2 glass metallics, and 2 water activated aqua chromes. The shade names are Trance, an electric sapphire to deep violet, Nirvana, a fiery copper to olive green, Divinity, a sparkling citrine, Sixth Sense, a pistachio green to cool taupe, Out of Body, a jade green to peacock blue, Heaven, a glittering mint to pastel chartreuse, Paradise, a glimmering fuchsia to forest green, Zen, a beetle green to honey bronze, Angels, a sparkling diamond, Trippy, rose gold to pine green, Escapism, an electric shamrock to hunter green, and Awakening, an intense teal to regal amethyst. The 2 water-activated aqua chromes are called Intuition, a brilliant cyan to soft lilac, and Aura, a brilliant iris to hazy violet. My first impressions of these swatches is that they feel like liquid. They just glide on, and the swatch photos and videos that I'm including here are all one dip swatches. I did not have to dip back into the palette to get that color payoff and that amount of stretch just with one shade. Let me show you actually a live swatch. So I haven't even shown you the palette yet. Wow. This is the palette. It comes in this box, so the packaging is the same. It is cardboard, but it feels very sturdy. It has this really fun purple design, and there's this kind of 3D quality to it with the etchings in the design. And when you open it up, it looks like this. It is just incredible. And you have a huge mirror, which I still have the sticker on. So you have the top row, the middle row is all textured eyeshadows. So these 2 on the sides are the water activated chrome shades, aqua chromes, I think, and these 2 are the pressed chrome flakes. So they're kind of this creamy pressed formula. It's very interesting, unlike anything I've ever tried. And then you have the bottom row of pressed eyeshadows. So let me just show you how far one swatch goes. I'm gonna swatch this purple blue. It's called Trance. I'm just dipping my finger in one time. You can already see how wet looking that is, even on my finger. And just watch this swatch. It's ridiculous. I mean, this is just one dip into the palette and you get this insane pigmentation. I mean, that's more than enough for one eye. Let me swatch the chrome flakes for you so you can see the texture close up. I'm going to swatch this shade called Paradise. It's like this purple green multi-chrome flip with actual flake particles inside. So I'm gonna see if I can hold this up for you. When you touch this formula, it starts to get a little bit creamy, like with the warmth of your finger. And when you pick up the product, you can actually see that you are picking up flakes that are embedded in this creamy emollient formula. I've actually never seen anything like this. I know DANESSA MYRICKS has her chrome flakes in the jar, but I've actually never tried that formula. So this is new to me. I don't know if this is unique to the palette or if it's the same formula. My guess is that it's a little bit different because this is a pressed flake, whereas I think the chrome flakes in the jar are not as tightly packed. But let me show you how it swatches on the skin. So if you glide your finger, you can kind of press the flakes down onto the skin, and it creates this really interesting textured moment. It kind of melts down the flakes and they become one with the skin, and it applies much like a cream eyeshadow. You can also kind of stamp the flakes onto the skin if you want a more irregular, flaky look. You get these chunky particles that stick to the skin. They are actually sticky. And so you have some time to work with the texture to create the kind of look that you want. If you want something smooth and liquid and metallic feeling, or if you want something that has that scattered, flaky look, which I think is just a really fascinating and unique texture. And hopefully you can see the green and purple multi-chrome shift there. It's really, really stunning. It gives like this oil spill kind of effect. Typically for me, when I wear color, I pick one accent color and create a monochromatic look. So I don't see myself necessarily creating multicolored looks with this palette, although I know a lot of people will, and those looks will be incredible. But just for me, the way I wear color, I will probably just pick one of these shades as a sort of accent shade. But for the purposes of testing this palette and getting all of the colors on my face, I'm going to create as many looks as I can, as many looks as my eyes will tolerate, because I'm not going to apply mascara or eyeliner, but I want to do a few different looks just to test out all of the shades. So let's just get right into the application. I am just dying to play with the greens in this palette. If I'm being honest, the greens are what drew me in, because you know I love green. If I wear a color, it's probably going to be a green shade, and I just love the richness and the variation of green tones in here. So I think I'm going to go into the shade Escapism, which is this shade here. And it's very complex. It has this like lime green chartreuse flip. And I'm just going to take that all over the eye to start. This is a pressed shadow, but I can already tell by the way my brush is dipping into the shadow that there is a lot of emollients in the formula. And that's what makes it look wet on the eye, and that's what also gives it that extreme glide across the skin. One thing I'll be looking out for, which I can't speak to in this video, but as I test the eyeshadows over time, is whether they last on my eyelids, because I am someone with oily eyelids, and a lot of times more emollient eyeshadows can break up throughout the day. So I would definitely use an eyeshadow primer with this palette, and I do have some on right now. All right, I'm just going to play around. Oh my God. Did you see that? That was, wow. That was full pigment. My eye, it's a wet looking eyeshadow already. Did you see that? That's never happened to me before. Oh my God. Okay. Wow. This is happening. Okay, great. I'm just gonna roll with it. I'm gonna do a bit of a watercolor look, I guess, and just build that up. Maybe I'll do something kind of abstract. I hope you can see the shift from that chartreuse yellow gold to that kind of teal green. I'm gonna flip my brush over and dip into the shade next to it called Trippy. And this is also a multi-chrome. It's got this green to red flip. And I'm just pressing this to the eye. Wow. That is ridiculous. I cannot believe the way these are applying. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, things are happening. I'm going to take a smaller brush, this is a Real Techniques 307, into the shade Zen, which it looks brown on camera, but it's got a like a bronze green shift right there, I think you can see. I'm literally just tapping the brush to my eye, and I cannot believe what's happening here. It just sticks to the eye, and it's like suddenly you have full pigment. It's wild. I've never played with an eyeshadow like this. Well, that got graphic rather quickly, but I'm into it. This is not a look I would typically wear out, but I kind of like seeing all the multi-chromes next to each other and the way the light hits each shade as I turn my eye. I mean, I feel like that's an eye look right there. Obviously, if I were going out, I would do eyeliner, I would go heavy on the mascara, I might even wing this shape out a little bit. Actually, let's do that. If I wear a graphic eye, this is the kind of shape that I like to do. So yeah, I would kind of sculpt that shape a little bit more, probably do a wing liner, heavy mascara, but I'm not gonna do that because I wanna do a different look on this eye and demo a few other shades. But I think you can see how quickly that eye look happened. I mean, it was literally 3 dips into 3 pans and just touching it to the eye. I've never experienced that in my life. The brush I used for that, by the way, was the Thrive Cosmetics eyeshadow all over brush. It's a really great shader brush for packing on color. Next, let's play with some of the bronze shades. I'm actually gonna build like an ombre eye starting with Angels, which is this bright crystally shade here. This one I'm picking up a little bit more of like a flaky texture. So I would definitely use an eyeshadow primer with this shade. I'm just going to press that to the inner corner. Ooh, so pretty. Very angelic. I guess it's called Angels for that reason. It has a very magical, crystally glow. It's more of a topper shade. It definitely doesn't have much of a base color, but there's a lot of silver crystal packed in there. Then I'm going to take the same brush into Divinity, which is this gold shade, and this has a similar crystally topper texture. I'm just kind of pressing these shades onto the lid. Getting kind of a mixed metals moment, actually. You've got the silver going into the gold. I really like that. That would be a fun, like, New Year's Eve look. Again, this is another topper shade without a lot of base pigment. And then I'm going to take the same brush into the shade Nirvana, and this is like a bronze green flip. I'm gonna take the edge of the brush and I'm just going to tap that into the outer corner. Wow, this is really cool. This is turning into a very interesting mixed metals sort of eye look. I'm very into it. And I'm just tapping to blend that into the gold shade that we put down. One notable absence from this palette, obviously, is mattes. There are no mattes in this eyeshadow palette, so all of the depth and light that you are building with chrome shades, with toppers, with the base color of each eyeshadow. That means that every look that you create looks different from every angle, which I think is kind of interesting, right? Like, you don't have any flat matte shades. These are all eyeshadows that look very dimensional. They look different in different settings, under different lights, from different perspectives. There's something very artistic and editorial about these kinds of textures and shades. I'm noticing that because of the nature of these shades either being very smooth and pigmented or more of a topper, I'm actually doing a lot more padding, much more of a padding motion with these eyeshadows than I would in any other palette. I'm not doing as much circular blending, not as much back and forth the way that you typically do with a lot of matte shadows, for example. Every motion that I'm doing with this eyeshadow is about pressing the pigment onto the eye. Even when I'm blending out the edges, I'm finding that padding and sort of pressing the eyeshadows together is giving me a better effect than your typical circular sweeping blending motions. So here are the first two looks. Obviously they're incomplete, but I do want to take these off and apply more eyeshadows so I can really show you more of the shades. All right, I'm back for look number 3, and I think I want to play with these pressed multi-chrome shades. I am very curious how they'll apply to the eyes, so I actually want to give them a shot on the bare lid. I did reapply eyeshadow primer, but I want to give these a shot on their own before I layer them or add other shades over them. So I think I'm gonna go into this shade called Heaven. It's that iridescent blue. I'm picking it up with my finger. You can feel the formula start to melt, like I mentioned earlier. And I think I'm just going to tap this on the lid for a very scattered, flaky effect. Wow, this shade is so interesting. These textures, I've never played with a texture like this on my eyes before. It almost looks like scales, like iridescent reptilian scales, but in a very artistic, abstract kind of way. I think that is so cool. I would just wear that as an eye look, honestly. Throw on some mascara and you've got a really interesting, editorial, artsy sort of eye look. I think I like the scattered, irregular pattern of the flakes on the eye more so than pressing the flakes down and kind of melting them into one shade. After all, that's why you're digging into a flaky eyeshadow versus a smooth metallic. I think I want to leave this eye as it is. I like the light iridescence, that scattered iridescent flake across the eye, across the naked eye. I think it just looks really pretty and kind of angelic. So I want to leave that as is. But for this next chrome flake, let's try something different. Let's try it layered over an eyeshadow. So I'm going to go into the shade Awakening, which is this. Wow, this is so weird. It looks purple to me now, but it's green on camera. Let me see if I can get it to look purple right there maybe. So interesting. I'm going to take that shade and maybe blend it into the outer corner. Again, using patting motions. I want a bit of a softer look with this shade. The nice thing about these really pigmented shadows is that they still diffuse around the edges. So you can see I'm kind of patting and whisking just around the edges to create a blend. And even though there's no other eyeshadow, no matte eyeshadow for that to blend into, it is fading out nicely. It just kind of creates a nice blown out look. All right, now I'm gonna go into Paradise, which is that other chrome flake shade that I swatched for you earlier. So I'm just gonna press that onto the lid in the same way that I did with the other shade. Okay, this side applied in a more chunky way, and I kind of wanted that. I wanted to see if I could get a more textured look overall. I do think that it picked up that initial shade that I laid down because you have to press to kind of use the warmth and pressure of your finger to press the flakes onto the lid. It did pick up some of that first eyeshadow that I put down. So I'm actually gonna touch that up with that same brush. This shade Awakening, I'm going to use to touch up that outer corner. But I am very into this like speckled, kind of crumbly textured look. I think it's just interesting. So you can apply shadow over and around the flakes. I think this combination is so fun. There's something kind of hocus pocusy about it. I'm gonna stop there with these two looks. Of course, the eye look, the whole look would look different with mascara, eyeliner, fake lashes even, all of that. But I like the light and dark and the contrast of these two shades. On this side, I have a smaller flake that looks a little bit more angelic and scattered. And on this side, I have the more textured, chunky application of the flakes. You do have some control over how large the particles are when you put them on. You can kind of feel it and pick it up on your finger and see the size of the flakes. But it is an irregular pattern. So this isn't going to be a pristine and precise kind of look. No matter what you do with these flakes, I feel like you're going after a really scattered, almost grungy kind of look. And I like that. I don't think we see that enough in makeup. And this is something that feels really unique and truly signature in a way to DANESSA MYRICKS. All right, we are moving on to looks 4 and 5. Is that right? 4 and 5? I think so. And I want to play with the water activated shades. These shades, as I was swatching, took a little bit of time for me to figure out how to get the best payoff and the right ratio of water to pigment. When I was swatching them, I put a little bit of water directly into the pans, and that seemed to work nicely because it almost worked like a palette where I could pick up water and pigment with a brush at the same time. The palette and the box itself don't come with any directions, and I feel like it would be helpful with the water activated shades to have some description of how best to apply these, just because it's the kind of product that sometimes requires a little bit of education, you know? So I have the water down in each of the two water activated shades, Intuition and Aura. I want to go in with Aura. I'm very curious about this shade because it has this really cool silvery flip to it. I think that because these are water activated, you probably want to use these before you go in with other eyeshadow textures, just because you don't want to mess up eyeshadow that you already have down with a more fluid texture. So I'm going to take my Real Techniques 321 brush. I just picked up some product and I'm almost just painting it across the lid. This is a really pretty shade. It's almost like a lavender with a silver flip. If there are any painters out there, you want to think of this as a watercolor. I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's a water activated paint. So as this is starting to dry, I can feel it setting on my eye. It's starting to get a little bit tighter and you can feel the texture really starting to set down. So I find that you can control the pigmentation by adding more or less water. And when the pigment in the pan is sort of pasty, not quite as wet, you get more pigmentation. Whereas if it's more watery, there's less pigment in the formula or in the particular mix that you're making. So you get a more sheer application. So there are a few different ways that you could apply this. I also swatched them with fingers. So that's one way of applying it too. I just think the brush gives you a little bit more control overall. Since we are creating this silver blue moment, I'm going to take my Rephr 02 into the shade Trance, and this is the most incredible royal purple, very, very rich, very saturated, and I am going to build on the outer corner, I think. This is getting very spacey, intergalactic. I like it. I love how rich that blue purple is. I actually think this is a difficult shade to formulate, not only because of the blue purple pigments, but because it has a deep base and it's hard to get the pigment to be vibrant without looking black because of the deep base. And this just has this incredible vibrancy and brightness despite being such a richly pigmented shade. I'm gonna take that same brush back into this shade Angels, and I wanna go for like a scattered light effect across the inner corner and across the lid, just to create that galaxy effect. It's so pretty. I think you can see how this palette is encouraging a lot of experimentation, a lot of play, and a lot of creativity. I don't usually go for shades or eye looks that are this experimental, but something about this palette just makes me want to play, and it is encouraging artistry, not just makeup application, but makeup artistry. I think there are just a few shades I haven't used yet. I haven't used these two greens, which I actually did play with before filming this video, and I loved. And the other water activated shade, Intuition. But I do really want to go into the greens right here. So I think I'm going to create a look with those next. I am going to take a Rephr 01 into the shade Sixth Sense. This is such a beautiful, vibrant lime green. I'm gonna press that into the inner corner, taking it almost to the front of my brow. Then I'm gonna go into Out of Body, which is that jade green to like peacock teal shift. I'm using the same brush, just flipping it over. And let's do a little bit of this in the outer corner. I do think a flat shader brush tends to work best with the pressed shades in here. Having the ability to really press and almost melt that texture onto the eyelid brings out the most shine and the most pigmentation with these shades. Then I'm gonna take a Rephr 02 into Divinity, this gold shade, and I'm going to do not quite a halo eye, but I wanna press that across the center of the lid. And I'm bringing that same shade on the lower lash line. I'm gonna stop there. This eye look on this side is very peacock inspired. I feel like even the shapes that it took on to the color, and I love this lime green shade. This one, it's a little bit harder to see on camera, but in person it's so bright. And I think it's one of my favorite shades in the palette. It just has this like zesty brightness. So again, I have two very bold looks, very different looks that would look even better if I finished them off with mascara, but here are the looks. All right, I am back for the final look. I actually redid all of my face makeup. I double cleansed and everything because I have an event to go to tonight. So I'm going to create a final look that might be a little bit more on the wearable side, just because I am gonna be out and about. I'm not necessarily going for an editorial look tonight, but I think it'll be helpful to see what a more wearable look can be like with this palette. And I have a feeling I want to go with the coppery golden tones. So I'm gonna start with this shade Nirvana. I've got my Esom V33 and I'm just going to create a bit of dimension in the outer corner. I think I am in the mood for a smudgy wing, so I'm just going to add a tiny, tiny baby wing and I'll be back to finish off the look and build on top of that. That actually took me forever. The wings just kept getting longer and longer. It was one of those days, but I used the Victoria Beckham Beauty Satin Kajal Liner in the shade Cocoa, which is my favorite for this kind of wing. I'm going to take a small smudger brush. This is the Thrive Cosmetics eyeliner smudge brush, and I'm going into the shade Escapism, that bright lime green shade. And I think I'm gonna keep it really close to that wing, but just add that little pop of color across the length of the wing. Actually, I'm gonna leave the inner third of the eye blank right now. I'm just gonna keep that green really concentrated above the center of my eye and toward the wing. I have a hooded eye, so when my eye opens, you're not gonna see this color as much, but I kind of like that little peekaboo pop of green happening. With the same smudger brush, I'm gonna go into this shade called Trippy, that pink green multi-chrome, and I'm going to take that into the inner third of my eye. And then finally, just going to add a touch of sparkle with the shade Divinity in the inner corner. With any other eyeshadow palette, this look would be the adventurous, creative look, but with this eyeshadow palette, this is a little bit on this tamer side. I think it's not neutral, but it's a little bit more quote unquote wearable. So I'm going to finish off the rest of my makeup and we will come back to wrap up my final thoughts about the palette. Makeup is done. I will list everything I used on the rest of my face in the description box. Final thoughts on the palette. I feel like my initial reaction to when I first applied the very first eyeshadow on the very first look captures it all. I am really impressed and shocked and inspired and wowed and excited by these eyeshadows. I just feel like there is an infinite number of possibilities when it comes to this palette because of the diversity of tones, textures, variations, and I can't wait to create more looks with this eyeshadow palette. I love that the tones are so saturated and beautiful and rich. This is going to show up true to color on every skin tone from very fair to very deep. And of course, DANESSA MYRICKS is always very inclusive and thoughtful in her shade curation and her shade ranges. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I have one suggestion for the brand about this palette, and I have one question that is still lingering in my head. So the suggestion is specifically about the water activated shades, and I mentioned this before. I think it would be really helpful to have some description of how best to use this formula, because I've tried it a couple of different ways now, and I think I'm still trying to figure out what's the best way to use it. Do you put water in the pan? Do you go in with a wet brush? Is there a preferred method that DANESSA herself enjoys? I'm sure they tested this formula a million different ways when formulating it, so I would love to know what the brand thinks is the best method of application. The question mark is really about the wear time of these eyeshadows, just because I haven't tested them on a very long wear day yet. So that's just something I'm gonna have to keep you posted on, and it's something I'll be keeping an eye on, especially because the shadows are so creamy, so emollient. There are a lot of binders, like oily binders, in the shadow formula, and that's something that can potentially break down throughout the day because I have very oily eyelids. So that's something that I'll keep you guys updated on in a future video, perhaps in a monthly favorites, we'll see. I think that really wraps up my major lingering thoughts and questions about the palette. Overwhelmingly, I'm impressed and excited, and I feel like this palette is truly unique on the market. I don't think there are a lot of brands that are willing to take this kind of risk because this palette isn't for everyone. This is not the palette that's going to sell to every single person and kind of have that common denominator quality where anyone can pick this up and use it. I do think this is a palette for the makeup lovers out there that are adventurous, that want to play and experiment with color. And I love that. I think it is a risky business move, but I really appreciate that DANESSA MYRICKS is pushing the envelope when it comes to texture and color experience with eyeshadow palettes. I'm just so happy that there's a palette out there for us makeup lovers. One thing I actually did just remember is I would love if this packaging felt a little bit more luxurious. For example, I would love it if it were a hard shell packaging and not the cardboard, just because the price point, you kind of want to see something that feels a little bit more luxurious. However, I understand that the formulas in here are probably very expensive to create because you have so many different textures, you have multi-chromes, you have pressed chrome pigments. I understand that that is probably where the budget for this palette goes, but just in terms of future releases at this price point, I would love to see a bit more luxury. So that is my final thought. If you have any questions for me about the palette, let me know in the comments, and I would love to hear what you think, if you are excited by this release, if it's totally out of your comfort zone, and if it's a pass. I understand that too. But I am just curious what your responses to this palette are, especially after seeing swatches and seeing how it applies on the eyes. So thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.